Hi guys, Yasmo here. The 319 Balance Manifesto for the Lake of Kalandra expansion for PoE was released, and I'm gonna go over that quickly, give you my summary, my opinions and thoughts about all of the changes, and a little bit of feedback for GGG as well, in case somebody from GGG watches this, just to give you some of my thoughts about this. So first of all, we got right off the bat spell suppression nerfs on armor. Spell suppression was meant to be for the right side of the tree builds, just like block, for example, is mainly for the left side of the tree builds. I think spell block and other ways of avoiding spell damage need to be expanded upon, because spell suppression is simply like the only reliable and powerful alternative that will actually allow you to reliably mitigate that damage, and it probably needs to be reworked a bit, but temporarily for now what they've done is just to lower the amount you get from the gear and increase the amount you get from the tree. So if you're playing on the right side of the tree like me, I'm for example going to be probably league starting a bow build that's on the right side of the tree. For me that's just strictly a buff. I have a lower gear requirement and I just by default get more spell suppression. If you're playing Raider, that's kind of a buff as well, indirectly, because you're just getting more spell suppression from something that isn't gear, so you can afford to get other stats on the gear instead of spell suppression, and makes it just easier to gear. These nerfs are pretty balanced in the sense that they're taking away roughly similar amount to what they're giving. It is still possible to cap your spell suppression without picking too much on the skill tree. Like you can put it on gear, especially if you're using a shield. If you get spell suppression on every piece of gear with a bunch of T1 rolls, but probably not even all T1 rolls, and then you get the anointment with like 15% spell suppression from something like the Inveterate notable, you're gonna be able to cap your spell suppression still. But it is gonna cost you a little bit more to do that if you're not on the right side of the tree. Overall, I think the change is fine. It just makes it so that the most powerful builds that we're using, like melding and Aegis and stuff like that, they cannot get also like spell suppression on the chest and the helmet and gloves and boots and be spell suppression capped, right? You cannot do that anymore. So I think that's fine. It's a fine change. Arctic armor. Arctic armor, here's the thing, right? A lot of people are saying, oh my god, in PoE you always move, you never wanna not move, this is trash, remove it. And my opinion on this is exactly opposite, right? My opinion on this is that supporting varying playstyles is really good, right? Arctic armor is not something that everybody should be using, right? I, for example, use Arctic armor in the gauntlet because I had no source of chill, so I couldn't slow enemies with chill because I was playing chieftain, and I had no source of immunity to freeze, right? Because I wanted to use a different pantheon for damage over time. And that was very, very helpful. So Arctic armor still has its niche. It's still strong in that sense because it helps you completely negate an ailment. It gives you an ability to even freeze ranged minions that are very far away from you, that are hitting you. And it can be scaled, it can be proliferated. There's some really cool tech that you can do with Arctic armor. It's a pretty niche skill, but it's a very powerful skill if you use it correctly. But it shouldn't be like everybody wants to use everything, right? Not everything should be for everybody. Not everything is for mapping. This is for something like if you're playing a build that I was playing, for example, which is Phantasmal Cremation. Phantasmal Cremation build that I was playing uses, for example, vines, right? Like the Nature's Grasp or whatever, like where you apply vines to yourself when you're stationary and you take less damage. You stack it with also Arctic armor and other stuff, and you're basically invulnerable. I was standing in the middle of the feared encounter and just doing the feared encounter just without moving my character at all, right? Because that's how tanky you can become. And for that niche, or for delving, for example, to do that in delve, that would be very, very cool as well. So I think it's good for something like that to exist. And if you want to get like reduced physical damage taken and stuff and fire damage taken for just mapping, you should look toward other solutions and just let this be the solution for the stationary playstyle where you're, for example, delving or doing simulacrums or doing boss, where your character can be stationary, and it actually can be a very good thing if you stack enough of these powerful modifiers that increase your damage, that reduce the damage taken, and it can be very, very powerful. So I think this is fine. Arctic armor, there's no problem with Arctic armor, and anybody who says that is just not understanding that there has to be diversity of different playstyles, and there are different things for different builds and different playstyles. So I'm happy that they're keeping the identity of this, and there should be stuff for that, right? And other stuff like for mapping and for just running around, for the people who say you never stand still in PoE, well, just don't use it. Just use different things out of like the hundreds of other abilities and mechanics that exist in the game. There is no need to just make everything conform to your preferred playstyle. That's just stupid. That just removes diversity and removes the interesting things from the game that we love, because it has so many cool, interesting niche things, right? Next we got Flesh and Stone buff. It's not enough. It's not gonna make it played, basically. That's the shorthand of it. It's whenever something affects only like attacks from ranged enemies or only attacks from melee enemies or whatever, it's not gonna be good enough. Like you have to make it like insanely powerful so that you can stack like multiple sources of that, and also get like something else for the opposite effect, right? Like you could have something that removes the damage, like lowers the damage from ranged enemies, and then something else that lowers the damage from melee, and you stack both together, and then that will be cool, right? But the only option I can see for that is if you are playing like a Blasphemy Aura setup, but that will usually be like an occultist, right? If you play like a Blasphemy Aura with Enfeeble with Temp Chains, which would reduce the damage of the melee targets, right? Then you would also be able to have Flesh and Stone, and then you would also be able to have the other one, the Arrow Dancing, right? Which would lower the damage you take from the ranged enemies, right? But unfortunately, this is not a viable playstyle just yet, so that's not good enough. So Arctic Armor, Flesh and Stone, then we've got Defiance Banner, just simply a numerical nerf for the armor and evasion values, which is very fair because it was way too powerful, but it also gives you now even more a reduced critical strike chance for the enemies nearby, which is actually pretty strong. This is something that people still will be using, and it will allow you to like reduce the enemy crit chance together with some masteries from your passive skill tree and maybe a couple of other modifiers. You'll be able to reduce the crit chance of enemies to 0 potentially, which is very, very strong. Basically becoming crit immune, at least for the nearby enemies. So I think Defiance Banner is still going to be used, but the nerf is definitely deserved because it was way too powerful for how little it costed you. Wind Dancer, a change that makes it slightly stronger, still not good enough. That's basically it. Arrow Dancing, the same thing. Change that makes it slightly stronger, still not good enough. Maybe in some niche scenarios, but not really. Then we've got ward changes. Ward is a mechanic that is very complicated, and it's very hard to judge it based on the numbers. Based on the numbers, I think like it's going in the good direction. It's basically becoming closer to something like Ghost Shrouds, right? But because all of these mechanics like only reduce the damage from hits, right? Everything we're reading, it only reduces the damage from hits, which is why these mechanics are not so universally like used, and people, you know, will pick one or the other. But there needs to be something else done for like more variety of modifiers for dealing with damage over time, right? And usually that is recovery, but recovery has been in a pretty weird state, I would say. Like recovery is in a weird state. You either don't have enough recovery or your recovery makes everything trivial, right? Like the flask thing with Pathfinder, you can make it so that when you're getting hit, you get so many charges, well, which is getting nerfed, but you get so many charges, you're basically immortal, or you can stack certain like recovery modifiers and life regeneration modifiers to be basically immortal. But then most characters just don't have enough of it. So there needs to be like a little bit more source of recovery, because all the defense stuff that we're going to be reading in these patch notes basically applies to hits exclusively, and that is a bit of an issue, right? That's why these mechanics have very glaring weaknesses. But ward basically needs to be tested, right? Without testing this, we don't really know how good these changes are. Maybe ward is going to be something that you really want on a lot of characters now, maybe not. But it definitely deserves a buff because it's not being used outside of the word loop, so that's pretty good change. I like that. Grasping Mail, yeah, this modifier was insanely overpowered. 100% increased global defense for characters that use the Aegis, which basically scale energy shield and scale armor, and global defenses applies to both. So it scaled your energy shield and armor at the same time, and they both scale off of each other because you recover energy shield based on how much armor you have, and you have more armor the more energy shield you have. So it's like a kind of a double dipping or feedback looping kind of a scaling, which was insanely powerful. So this modifier was way too strong to have on rare items, because this alone would basically mean, okay, now I have a great item and it doesn't really matter what I have, I can multi-craft and I'm still happy, right? So this is very good that they changed that, because it was way too powerful. So good change. Then we've got the Gravicious Veiled modifier, which basically gave you ES for percentage of your life, and now it's basically like on a craft you get 12% Fizz as LA, like Fizz damage from hits taken as elemental damage, which is insanely powerful, right? It's a very strong modifier still, and now it doesn't require any setup, right, other than just elemental resistances and maybe increasing your max LA resistances, and that's it. Like by default, this is like 10% less physical damage taken, right? Because you're mitigating 75 at least % of that elemental damage that you're taking instead. So this is very good, and for characters that need more physical damage mitigation from hits, this is just a no-brainer. You can just craft that and you're very happy, right? And especially the veiled option, which gives you 18%, because this gives you both, right? The way it is worded, it gives you both the fizz damage from hits taken as lightning and taken as fire in here, right? So you can very reliably get a lot of fizz taken as LA, and that is a very powerful mechanic, especially for characters that don't have a lot of armor. So the characters on the right side of the tree again. So the right side of the tree, the evasion, spell suppression, and then fizz taken as elemental is going to be very powerful. You basically skip the determination, you just run grace. You can maybe get ghost shrouds if you have some evasion bases, or maybe if you have some evasion ES bases, you can maybe go towards ward and something like that, right? And then for your physical mitigation, you can do something like enduring composure for the endurance charges, and then you can get fizz taken as LA, and you're gonna have a very well-rounded defense on your character. So this is a very powerful craft still. They made it from like one very powerful craft into another very powerful craft that actually requires less setup. So it's very strong. Probably a good change still, because it was like very universally used, and it was like a cookie cutter a defense mechanic that everybody was using, and you were getting a lot of ES without investing in ES. So I think this is a good change as well, because we are still getting something very powerful. What else do we have? We've got the blind. This is just trash. Blind, these blind nodes, nobody takes them. This blind mastery, nobody takes it. There are much better ones that people are taking. Then we've got Mind Over Matter, which unfortunately is just a wash. This is nothing, this is no change basically. Instead of getting some modifiers and Cloak of Defiance for the extra damage taken from mana instead of life, now we're getting it as a base. 40% damage taken from mana instead of life. Mind Over Matter is still not good, and the reason has nothing to do with how much damage you're taking instead of life, you know. It all has to do with how much mana you can regenerate, right? Your mana value, the regeneration of mana that you have, like how much mana you can regen reliably, and how much damage does that mana give you. That's what's missing, right? Not the damage taken as like damage taken from mana before life. This is not the important part why MOM is not being played. The reason why MOM is not being played is because you cannot leverage it as effectively as before, and that's what needs to be addressed. So this is just a pointless change. Just, I don't know why they even bothered doing this. Fortification is too difficult to gain for some melee builds, and they're making it a bit easier to gain, and they're increasing the duration, and they're giving you more ways of scaling the duration of the fortification. This is fine. This is a good change. This is definitely something that will help the melee builds be a little bit more tanky, but of course it doesn't fix melee in general, and it's still not good enough, but good change nonetheless. So this is like a small to medium buff to fortify for melee builds, which is good, and that's basically it. So good change, but melee needs much more. Then we've got Minion Balance. So basically a lot of these nodes are minion changes, And these minion changes are massive. This is going to completely shake the meta of minions. Like, so many things are gonna be different than before. We've been using the same minion tech for years basically, and now it's going to change. A lot of stuff is gonna change, right? So let me talk basically about everything. So first of all, I'm gonna go maybe not in order, right? Because I want to put this all in context so you understand what I'm talking about, right? So the most important things about the minions that are being changed, right, are number one, Necromancer doesn't have anymore the +2 to level of all minion skill gems, right? Now instead it can get the Unholy Might, which the poison builds will take that. Other builds will not really. Other builds will instead do something else or play another Ascendancy. But basically, they're removing +2 to all minion skill gems from the Necromancer. That's number one thing to keep in mind. Number two thing to keep in mind is that minions no longer have the hidden penalties to bleed, ignite, and poison. So the ailment damage is much higher now for most minions. So that means they're doing double the poison damage, like literally double the poison damage, every minion that can poison, right? They're doing 3.5 times as much ignite damage, so a lot more ignite damage, right? Like 350% more. And then we've got 7 times as much bleed damage, which is insane, right? Like just so much bleed damage, right? Very, very big change. And then other than that, that's a massive nerf to damage over time ailments from minions. And then we've got a big nerf for minions, which are going to be getting much smaller bonuses from Endurance, Frenzy, and Power Charges. Most importantly, Frenzy and Power Charges. They were getting a ton of movement speed, attack speed, cast speed, and more damage multipliers, as well as crit chance. So they were getting tons of that. Of course, it wasn't completely reliable for most builds, like depending on the build. Like if you had like permanent minions, they had these charges up all the time. If you had minions that we were frequently spawning, such as skeletons, or for example, what are they, phantasms, right, or SRS, this doesn't really hurt them that much, right? So keep that in mind, right? SRS, if you'd be using Necromantic Aegis, which nobody uses anymore, SRS and phantasms, for example, do not suffer that much from this change actually, right? Because they already were not having consistently these charges. Like they had a charge or two, but they weren't sitting at 3 charges all the time. So the nerf is not as big for those builds, but it is much bigger for example, zombies and specters, which were like the more powerful buffs, and golems as well, right? Golems received pretty big nerf. All the permanent minions are hurt the most by this change, and especially permanent minions that aren't specters, I guess, because if you're using specters, then you don't have the support specters, right? If you're using them for damage. So mainly affects like zombies, a little bit skeletons, and golems and stuff like that, right? So this is what's affected the most, right? So let's look from the beginning in the context of that, because I think this is very, very important to have that context, right? Like dots massively buffed, other stuff like in general nerfed by a huge amount, right? So let's see what else do we have in here, right? So we're getting less life on minions, except for like Animate Guardian, or except for like Raise Spectre and stuff, right? So they're gonna be getting like minion life and damage is unchanged in the very early game. So when you're starting your campaign, roughly 30% lower in the mid acts, roughly 20% lower at level 20 of minion skills. So when you get to, I don't know, when you're like progressing through your maps, right? You're getting to your red maps, and then roughly 10% lower when you're like min-maxed in with your good gear. What it translates to is basically that the story will not really be affected that much. Like roughly 30% lower in mid acts doesn't really matter. The thing is, I saw a lot of comments on Reddit and on Twitch chat from people who either don't play minions or don't know how to play minions. From like people were saying how minions already struggled in acts. Like this is absolutely ridiculous. Minions have by far the most damage of any build during the acts. Like not even close, like by far. Forget Seismic Trap, right? Seismic Trap, like Trapper, Miner, any type of caster, nothing had as much damage against, for example, bosses, right? In the mid acts, so let's say like Act 5, Act 6, right? In these acts, like if you're in Act 6 and you are fighting bosses, right? You're fighting all these like bosses that you get skill points for, right? Minions in an SSF start were the build that always did the most damage. If it wasn't, then you were playing it wrong, right? If it wasn't for you, then you were just not doing something, right? I have a minion leveling guide, which if you follow that guide, you're going to absolutely obliterate everything in the campaign. The campaign is a joke. Minion feels like such a broken archetype during the campaign, right? So this doesn't fucking matter. This doesn't matter at all, right? This roughly 20% lower at 20 of the minion skill. This matters mainly for the survivability of specters and like support minions. That's the annoying thing, in my opinion. But the thing is, it doesn't affect the specters, right? So the specters, again, this affects all minions other than raised specters. So the only minion that this would really affect negatively is not really affected by that, right? And then 10% lower at 30 of the minion skill. This can be offset by the gear and the changes that they did to that will allow you to actually scale the minions further, because again, you're supposed to invest in your gear. You're supposed to scale your build with the gear just like any other build, right? You're no longer going to just be getting free power from just leveling the gem. This is something that is very important, that it is actually a good change in my opinion, right? So overall, this is completely fine, right? Overall, this seems completely fine, and this is the right direction to go. Instead of having just, I equip the gem and I'm powerful, like you need to scale stuff with your gear just like any other build, right? The base life and damage of minions that are not associated with skill gem have been adjusted to counteract these changes. Yep, so basically no change with that, except for raised spiders from Alekari's Fang, because they're getting a nerf to the damage. Why? Because they're getting a buff to the damage as well, because they're getting double the poison damage, right? They're getting double poison damage. That's why they needed to also nerf them to not make them too powerful, because they were already super strong meta build. So the level of monster created by raised specter skill has been lowered. Now I don't know why they made this change, right? So this actually lowers the life of the specters, but the thing is, it lowers it by 1 level, right? So at gem level 25, which is very easy to accomplish, right? You just have a level 21 gem, then you have +2 from either the helmet or the chest corruption, and then you have +2 from a wand or something, or +1 from one wand, +1 from another wand, right? So level 25 is still very, very easy to reach, and you're basically getting 1 level lower on your specters. I don't know why specters were not too powerful in that sense. They were not too easy to keep alive. I think so as well. So probably there's going to be a necessity now to use the rings, right, which will increase the life, for example, as one of the roles on your minions and so on. And they want you to invest in the actual gear to keep your minions alive, to make your minions stronger, to make them do more damage and so on. So that's why this change, I guess, right? They added a new ring base. That's what I'm talking about, the bone ring. The ring has now implicit minion elemental resistances modifier, which is kind of trash. It's pretty bad. This is like this is a pretty sad thing, because minion builds really want to use unset rings. But here's the thing, right? Minion builds use unset ring because it gives you more power, because it can give you more power, right? But it can give more power to other builds as well. It's just that minions have such an easy access and scale so well with gems. Like the more gems you have, the more powerful your build can become, basically, because you can just keep adding supports to many different minions, to many different support minions, and it's just an insanely powerful way to play. However, that's not the only way that you should be allowed to scale, right? You shouldn't only be able to scale gems and the skill tree. You should also be able to scale through the gear, and they're giving you more options. Basically, the rings that can roll the minion related modifiers are going to be like extra wands, right? We'll see which mods are going to be there. As far as I know, there's going to be minion life, minion resistances, minion attack speed, cast speed, move speed, probably also minion flat damage. There's going to be also minion crit chance and maybe minion crit multi. So there's going to be a lot of stats for minions on these ranks that are going to allow you to just scale your build, right? And there are probably going to be some ridiculously powerful rings that people will make. The only issue of them is the implicit, right? And without the combinators, you cannot move these on an unset ring. So that's going to be a bit of an issue. So it's like a shitty implicit, but maybe it will allow you to make your minions actually tankier without having to without having to run other things that will like increase the tankiness of your minions, right? So maybe it's actually going to be necessary to have that minimum amount of minion elemental resistances, or maybe we're just going to be crafting like a decent ring and then corrupting it for some good corruptions on that. We'll see. So that's a very interesting change. We'll see what level this comes at, right? Hopefully this is pretty low. Hopefully this is like level 20 or something like that at the most, right? That would be really cool. But maybe it's much higher, who knows. Then we've got Bone, Ivory, and Fossilized Spirit Shield. So these are found pretty early in the game. Bone Shield, like Bone Spirit Shield, was used to make the +1 recipe for the minion helmet. So now they have minions deal increased damage implicit modifiers. So previously the meta was to grab a very quick one-handed weapon, like a sword, right? Like a very quick sword or a very quick fist weapon or whatever the hell you can that you can equip, slap on it an essence for minion damage and just use that to shield charge very quickly while having some minion damage, and that's how you would level. But now you're actually going to be able to use the shield for the minion damage, so you're still going to be able to shield charge, and then you're going to have the Calling Wand or Coveting Wand, which are basically the level 20 and level 50 equivalents of the Convoking Wand, right? So we'll see what's the attack speed on these. Hopefully it's a pretty decent attack speed. If it's like 1.5, that would be insane, but probably it's going to be something like 1.2 or something like that, which is, you know, kind of slow, but it would be nice if they were actually quite fast so you can actually level with shield charge quickly. Or maybe you can like slap an attack speed essence on them or something like that, but that's really cool because we're getting more options for gear while leveling for the minions. So you're getting the shields that are gonna have minion modifiers and also can roll minion related modifiers, so you no longer need to rely on essences for everything, because before that your leveling would vary a lot depending on like how many essences you get, right? If you get the essences that give you minion speed and minion damage and so on, if you get like a couple of them, your leveling will be amazing. If you don't get them, well, it still would be amazing, but you know, it's a really nice thing to have like a piece of gear that actually gives you some benefits, right? So this will feel really good because the minions doing like, you know, roughly 30% lower damage and lower life in the mid act. The thing is, you're gonna have a bunch of these stats come back to you through like the Bone Shield, through the Spirit Shield, and also through the ring and through the wands, right? So you're gonna have a lot of these stats back, and this is the thing that people are ignoring, right? You have potentially what, 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces of gear during leveling that is counteracting this 30 and 20% lower life and damage, and probably you're gonna get more stats on those if you roll them decently, right? So potentially you're going to be actually even stronger while leveling than before if you get decent gear, right? And it's really nice to have that option, just like every other build. If you get lucky and get really good gear, you're stronger than before. If you don't get lucky, you're about the same, right? So this is honestly, in my opinion, a very good change because it allows you to scale your gear more. It allows you to play the game better, actually, right? This gives you like more skill expression in terms of like acquiring gear and making the gear. So that's pretty good. The helmet change is also something that's gonna be completely like potentially, I'm not sure about that, but I think potentially it can change the meta completely, right? Because instead of getting the +3 to level of socketed minion gems and using the helmet as your main links setup, you're gonna be able to get +2 to all minion skill gems, so basically the Necromancer Ascendancy, and you're going to be able to get it on other classes as well, like Occultist, for example, right? If you're playing like poison minions, which will be probably very good. And then the recipe is changed. It's probably going to be, somebody said that like it's probably going to be like 40% quality gems with minion tag or something like that with the helmet, and that's going to give you the +1 to all minion skill gems, and then +2 is probably you just have to roll it. And then it is now possible to obtain +2 to level of socketed minion gems as a corrupted implicit modifier on helmets, body armors, gloves, and boots. So this is massive. This is insane, right? For end game gear scaling, people are going to be corrupting so many flesh crafters and so much stuff, right? Like flesh crafter with +2 on top of the +2 global, right? This is going to give you more levels on your, for example, Scale Mages or whatever other minions you want to have in your Flesh Crafter. this is gonna give you potentially like more levels, right? So +4 levels instead of +3 levels in the helmet before. So this potentially gives you more levels, especially if you're not playing a Necromancer. If you're playing a Necromancer, you're getting 1 level less. If you're playing anything other than Necromancer, you're getting +1 more level, right? So this is honestly to balance the Necromancer, which was too strong of an ascendancy for sure. So in my opinion, again, good change. Ghastly Eye Jewels had their modifier pool updated. We'll see what that is. Indomitable Army no longer has minions grant 15% increased maximum life, so now it has like resists, less physical damage taken, and regen or something. I don't know. It has like 4 lines, and now it's gonna have 3 lines instead of 4. Still gonna be pretty good. And then small passive skills that the Grave Intentions provide. Minions have 8% increased maximum life instead of the resistances, and that is good because if you are picking that, right? If you are picking this, then you're gonna be getting life instead of res, because that res is probably gonna be on your rings. So they're giving you, they're taking away this from the passive skill tree, so you don't have like redundant elemental resistances, right, on your passive skill tree if you're picking that. And then what do we have? There we have like individual changes to the skills, right? These are pretty massive. These are, again, something pretty strong. So Absolution is getting a buff, right? So Absolution, like league starting as Absolution, is gonna be very strong, right? Absolution has some weaknesses in the late game. I think like bossing is not good on it or something. I've actually never played this, but I listened to people just talk repeatedly how good this is as a league starter, how powerful it feels when you're league starting with Absolution, and I think also you use potentially Herald of Purity, which is also going to get buffed, right? So Absolution, Herald of Purity, potentially like a Guardian build, same with Agony Crawler, with a Guardian build or with a Poison build, right? Those are going to be buffed, very significant buffs, right? Like for example, if you have like 40 Virulence stacks, right? That is 40% increased attack speed for your Agony, Herald of Agony, right? Which is pretty massive, right? So Herald of Agony getting a pretty significant buff. Arcalis Fang, this is losing the 25% Physis extra Chaos. That is probably because as a Necromancer, for example, you're getting the 30% Physis extra Chaos now from the Unholy Might, right? If you're picking that node. And then Poison Duration is reduced to 4 seconds instead of 8, because basically you're dealing double poison damage, but it's gonna have half the duration, which actually is a buff, right? Because you're gonna be killing things faster. You're gonna be doing the exact same damage based on only this change and the poison change, right? If we discount other stuff, right? You're doing exactly the same damage, but you're doing it quicker, right? You're doing it in 4 seconds instead of 8 seconds, right? So actually, it's a DPS increase, right? It's a DPS increase if you're hitting the target for less than 4 seconds, right? Oh, sorry, for like 4 seconds or less, right? Then it's a DPS increase, which is actually pretty massive, right? So people are talking about how everything is being nerfed, the minions are unplayable now, and if you're hitting something and it dies within 4 seconds, then your DPS is literally doubled right now. Like your DPS is doubled right now, and people are saying how this is a nerf, right? Just people can't read. People just don't read everything, you know. Plus, like the gear that you can use, yeah, just insane changes, and people are really like not reading that. Animate Weapon increased mana cost. I think Animate Weapon is getting a huge buff, and the reason is because Animate Weapon with poison now basically deals double the damage, and then with the where is it? Summon Holy Relic, right? This is if you were playing like Animate Weapon that relied on Cyclone and just spinning to cast while channeling summon stuff, for example, right? This is gonna be buffed as well, right? Because Summon on Holy Relic is now much more powerful. This is something that probably is gonna be abused in the early game, right? In the early game, just anybody could use that. If you're using some attacks, right? You can just have Summon Holy Relic and just deal a bunch of damage. This is massive, right? Like it grants 50% more life regeneration per second right now to allies and minions, right? That's massive. 250% increased effectiveness of added damage. So if you have like chance to poison with it or something, like poison holy relics can be potentially very powerful. This is huge. Like these buffs are absolutely massive, and holy relic was already a strong skill, right? So if you're playing something like summon holy relic with Absolution, with where is it, Herald of Agony and Herald of Purity. Dude, you can make such ridiculously crazy minion builds right now that are different from the like cookie cutter like skeleton zombie that everybody used to play right now, right? So these changes are really massive, and people are really sleeping on this. Same with this Summon Phantom supports. Summon Phantoms now deal approximately 20% more damage at all gem levels. The what now? So Summon Phantoms support is something that you put in your Soul Rest, right? So it should affect Soul Rest as well. And Soul Rest was already a very strong build. Even after like all the changes, it was basically, it got like 10% nerf and a 10% buff at the same time. So it was basically the same as before. You just had to press one less button because you couldn't get like Unnerve, but then you could play another Ascendancy, right? You could play Guardian and then still get Unnerve. But now with this 20% buff, this is massive, right? First of all, this is going to help your leveling. This is going to be a big deal for leveling. And then it's going to be also massive in the late game, right? So potentially Soul Rest, very strong starter, right? So Absolution, probably going to be a very strong starter, league starter. Summon Phantasm, like whatever leveling you want to do, and then go for Soul Rest. That's going to be a very strong league starter as well. Massive changes. Then we've got Raise Zombie. So Raise Zombie is doesn't get the movement speed, just gets like the life or whatever it was getting from the quality, just a small nerf to movement speed, but it's being compensated for by the haste buff, which we'll go over later. Then we've got Carrion Golems, right? Carrion Golems are, this is just like they're losing life, but they're gaining life, but they're losing life. They're just kind of like cleaning it up, right? Chaos Golem is being buffed. So other golems, except for Carrion Golems, are being buffed and fixed, which is really nice. They're becoming more viable. So Chaos Golem is getting a crit strike chance, which it before didn't have. It's getting more damage effectiveness for the added damage. The Chaos Storm skill now deals 25% more damage. Flame Golem is gaining the ability to like hit with the mortar attack against like close targets, so it's not going to be bugging out anymore. It's doing much more damage. Ice Golem, just more damage. Lightning Golem, more damage. Stone Golem is just getting the life change. Stone Golem is actually not being changed that much because it was being used with the Carrion Golem. So all the like underused golems are getting a huge buff, and now you can look potentially at making a build with them, which is really cool. Holy Relic, like I said, massive buff. SRS, this is the change that people have been waiting for. SRS no longer has the penalty to added damage, which is really nice. And the added damage is very powerful for example, going the Ignite way, right? If you're like wanting them to explode. I'm not sure if like the added damage applies to that, but I think it should, right? And now minions deal 38% more damage instead of 0, right? So as you're scaling the levels, you're getting a more damage multiplier, basically like another powerful support gem like some skills have, right? There are some skills that require like extra utility, which is why they have like an extra hidden link support gem within the skill itself. Like for example, Heavy Strike I think has that, like chance to deal like more damage, or like chance to deal double damage on top of like regular scaling. And same with SRS now. So now SRS has been buffed by a huge amount. Minion base life is now increased to compensate for all the other changes, and now it costs a little bit more mana, and the helm enchantments are a little bit stronger if you want to use them, which was not really something that you really needed to use, but you could. So SRS is getting a massive buff on top of the gear being buffed, on top of the fact that it didn't really benefit from charges that much, right? Because these minions live pretty short duration anyway, right? It's not like you run through the entire map with these minions. You just spawn them and they either get detonated right away or they attack something and they die. So this is a massive nerf to SRS, and SRS should probably be a very viable starter right now. SRS with what else is there? With the Phantasms, right? Probably gonna be very comfy starter instead of the Skeletons maybe, right? But you can also go with Skeletons, but SRS is gonna be so nice to start with the Phantasm. Honestly, honestly, leveling through the story with SRS and Phantasm is gonna be busted. Like, it's gonna be so powerful. You'll see, like, it's gonna be so fucking powerful. People are really not understanding these changes. Like, they're reading this and they're only see nerfs, and they have like blinders around their eyes, and they don't see all the insane buffs, and they just don't think creatively and don't see how much stuff we're getting for minions. This is honestly the Minion League unironically. Like, we're getting so much stuff for minions. There are gonna be so many cool minion builds that we can experiment with now. It's really insane. Summon Reaper is becoming better to use actually, right? So instead of gaining 40% increased damage, it gains only 20%, right? Where is it? No, instead of 40% increased damage, it gains 40% increased attack speed. It gains, okay, so we're getting 20% more movement speed and we're getting 20% more attack speed, right? So it's gonna feel better. And also grants 30% increased AoE. So it's going to have a bigger AoE, it's going to move faster, it's going to attack faster, which means it's going to have a better clear speed, so it's going to feel better. And that is really, really good. Added damage effectiveness nerfed a little bit. And then the bleed, Summon Reaper already had like a bleed buff, like buff to the bleeding damage it was dealing, which is getting removed, but the bleed itself is gonna do 7 times the damage it did before, so it's gonna have to be checked, like just like some other things. It's gonna have to be tested, right? Because we get so many changes back and forth, like this many reduced, this many increased, this many less, this many more, and it's really hard to say like what is the actual result of those changes, because we have like 4 changes back and forth. But if we test this, we're gonna be able to say for sure. But it looks promising, and it looks something like actually I'm interested in trying, right? Which is really good. That's something that I want to see from changes from the patch notes or the manifesto. Then we got Summon Skeleton, which no longer gains the 50% more added damage. And Skeletal Mages now deal like a little bit less damage, 25% less damage at gem level 20. It was the most meta build. It was the most like easy build to play, just a super lazy and very powerful build that is getting nerfed, and that's good, right? Like other builds, other minion builds are getting buffed, and the most powerful, maybe not most powerful necessarily, but the most popular and powerful build that was played is getting nerfed. So everything in order. Varana's March. People were like confused by this for some reason. Basically, what's happening is the boots are getting buffed, right? So there have been some values that have been disabled. So basically they weren't working correctly, right? Or they had a low values, so they're removed. And now you only get fewer mods, but they're fixed, and basically they're doing 50% more damage. So these boots are basically buffed. That's it. That's just a buff. And then we've got these changes that we went over, right? So the dots, the frenzy charges loss, so like massive buff, massive nerf, right? And then we've got critical strike changes. So we're getting more options for crit. Later on, you'll see that Brittle got nerfed. Brittle is still gonna be strong, but not like insanely broken like it was. So we're losing some Brittle, but we're getting more chance to scale crit through the gear. So you're gonna be able to get crit on more passives on the skill tree. Spirit Offering is gonna give you crit, so if you're playing softcore, this is an offering that you could invest into if you want to scale crit. We're getting crit from the rings, the new minion rings. We're getting crit from the new shield, the minion shield as well. So a bunch more crit, right? Unfortunately, this is something that I'm really unhappy to see, right? They could have just left this mastery. Like they should have just left the 100% increased critical strike chance mastery. This should not be removed. If GGG is watching this, please just add mastery and just keep this one. Just let people choose what they want from their mastery. Like if somebody is focusing on crit, let them have one crit mastery that they can choose. It doesn't have to be this one. Maybe nerf it a bit. Maybe make it 50% or whatever, right? If you want now to keep these values more in line, but don't remove it. Don't remove an option that people want from the masteries, right? This is so important for build variety. This is so important for the skill tree not looking exactly like one and the same skill tree every single time you play minions, right? Because now when you're playing minions, you're gonna path to the wheel that is going to give you the crit, and you're not gonna be able to like go into some other thing and pick this mastery. Everybody is gonna be pathing to the same place, and the masteries are what's making the tree flexible. So please, please, please keep this as a mastery. There is no reason to remove this at all. Like there's absolutely no reason to remove this. What you're doing is only making the builds less flexible. You're restricting the options, and you're not really addressing the power or anything, because if you're doing elemental damage, you just pick another mastery that also gives you a lot of damage, but you're removing the options from people, right? So this is a really bad change in the sense that this is being removed. This should be kept, and this should be added, right? They should simply add one more option. Introduces more choices, right? Introduces more options, introduces more build variety, instead of just like reducing the options, right? That's just stupid. And then, yeah, we're getting the crit modifiers on the new minion items and so on. So that's pretty good. This is something we talked about. And then we've got miscellaneous skill and support gem balance. So now we went over the minions. Just to summarize the minion changes, like just so that you know basically what it means. The most popular minion skills, some of them are getting nerfed. If you wanna play, if you're gonna make the exact same build that you made last league to play minions, it's gonna be weaker, right? It's gonna be weaker by like, I don't know, 30%, and some of your minions are gonna feel bad, right? But if you adapt and make the actual changes and use the skills that actually have been buffed, you're gonna have a much more powerful build. You're gonna have really strong league starts. So for minions, Phantasm, SRS, Absolution, all are gonna be very powerful starters. They're gonna be really fucking strong, right? So like, it's not even a question, right? And then now we have more options for support specters that will be actually more powerful as well, right? So overall, huge meta shake-up, and people who just want to play the exact same thing they played before are gonna cry, and people who can read and can adapt are gonna be really happy because there are so many new giga powerful builds to try. Like minions are gonna be so fucking strong, right? Minions are gonna be really strong. It's just people need to learn to adapt. Okay, what else do we have? We got skills that cause corpse explosions, deal significantly more damage. So this is very simply nerf to like corpse explosion stuff, right? So we've got the Corpse Pact, we've got the Phantasmal Unearth, less corpse life, detonate dead, so DD, losing a ton of damage. Through this and through the corpse reduction on the specters and so on, DD is losing a ton of damage and is basically being like no longer top build, right? No longer top build. Maybe it's still playable, but it's no longer anywhere near a top build. Cremation, explosion deals base damage, 4% corpse max life at level 1, up to 5 at 20, previously 4. So this is actually scaling, the cremation is scaling a little bit with levels. Seems like Phantasmal Cremation will be fine, even with the Phantasmal Unearth nerf. Volatile Dead, this is scaling a little bit, and Body Swap is scaling. So Body Swap is actually getting buffed, right? Interestingly. Body Swap is a very fun skill if you ever tried it, and it's getting a little bit of a buff, so maybe at some point it will be viable. It's like a flicker, but a spell. It's a very interesting skill. Okay, then we've got a trap changes, right? Which is something that I read it, and I was very surprised by some of this. So first of all, Fire Trap is getting nerfed by like 25%. Apparently this was an unintended change, so they're changing it back to where it was. So Fire Trap no longer gonna be used with the RF. It was very powerful, now it's gonna be less powerful. It's still gonna be playable, but not as strong. And then they got changes to these cooldown based traps, right? Reading this is honestly I don't know, PR mistake, unless it's like an actual mistake, which I hope it's not. But this doesn't address the most important thing, which is the Seismic Trap, right? Advanced Traps was a very powerful support, deserved a nerf, that's cool, right? The Hasty Reconstruction, cooldown reduction, I don't think they should change. They should have changed that. I don't think they should have touched that at all, right? This is just pointless, right? Because it is nerfing these traps, and these traps are getting a little bit buffed to compensate for that. But what isn't getting nerfed and what isn't really getting affected by any of this much is the Seismic Trap, which is still going to one-shot bosses, which is still going to have insane damage, and it needs to be nerfed, okay? So that's my second piece of feedback for GGG, if anybody is watching this. You basically need to cut the damage on the Seismic Trap, like the numbers of it, right? It says like whatever, 1000, 2000, whatever it says, right? Whatever it says on the Seismic Trap, the damage it does per tick, right? Per activation, that needs to be reduced. Reduce it by 20%, 30%, 40, 50, I don't care. It needs to be reduced by an amount, right? Just so that not everybody and their dog starts with Seismic Trap again, right? People are gonna be so fucking bored. This is at this point you're like sabotaging your game by not talking about this change, even if it's in the patch notes. Not putting it here is a huge mistake, right? Not writing here like we are going to make it like a numerical change and reduce the damage of Seismic Trap if you're not writing this here, you're making a giant mistake, right? This is honest, this cannot be like overstated. You need to make a numerical change to that or people are going to riot. Everybody's gonna be so fucking bored that they feel like they have to start with Seismic Trap again. This is honestly a really, really bad move to not change that, right? So this is something that cannot, like, it cannot go live like this, right? You cannot release the league without nerfing, like, numerically the amount of damage that Seismic Trap deals. Stop with these, like, cute little roundabout nerfs that don't touch Seismic. Like, it feels like you have someone at the GGG office who is like doing everything they possibly can to keep the Seismic Trap not nerfed, right? They're like, guys, trust me, the advanced traps, it's gonna completely nerf Seismic. It's not gonna be good anymore. Or like, guys, trust me, the duration nerf before, or like the AoE nerf is gonna make it so that it's no longer good. Like, no, it's still the best skill, right? After these changes, Seismic Trap is still the best skill in the game, right? Why? Why is it still the best skill in the game for like a year? Like, explain please. Like, this needs to be nerfed like yesterday, right? This is such a no-brainer that like everybody in the community is crying for this. Please stop making us play Seismic Trap. We don't want to play Seismic Trap over and over, right? Like let us play something new, and they're just refusing to nerf Seismic Trap directly, right? I don't know why. Like, Seismic Trap needs to be nerfed directly, not indirectly, directly, right? It's like super important thing. If this manifesto had one sentence, it should be Seismic Trap will deal less damage, right? Like, direct change. Like, that's the most important thing that should be in this manifesto that isn't. Then we've got Explosive Arrow. So Explosive Arrow is getting buffed to the direct damage and nerfed to the dot damage by 2% per stack. Seems reasonable. Basically, it's getting nerfed to the Ignite, which was like, you know, the Ballista build was based around that. It was very popular league starter. Lots of people were playing it just without even thinking, and it's probably deserved, right? It's probably a deserved change. So DD and EA were nerfed in a significant way, and the most powerful build, more powerful than any of those, was not nerfed, right? Which is a big mistake, right? That's the one that needs to have same changes as EA, same changes as DD had. Seismic Trap needs to have that as well. Okay, then we've got cast when damage taken and cast on death support. They're gonna be basically doing less damage, so cast on death is gonna be harder to make and to farm like the uber bosses. Now you're gonna have like to have giga gear in order to pull that off. Divine Blessing, honestly a very annoying playstyle. They're making it harder to use by like bypassing the mana reservation cost and using life tap and so on. So they're making that now not work. Totally fine. Nobody wants to use that, and could be honestly just removed from the game. Nobody would care, because it's just honestly just very annoying to have to press so many buttons like that. Then we've got Sniper's Mark, which is still very, very powerful. Doesn't provide the flask charges anymore. Totally fine. Doesn't really matter that much. Hydrosphere nerfed for the minions. It was nerfed for the players, and they just didn't realize that it still works with minions. So like spiders were doing melee splash and hitting twice basically, or like doing 50% more damage just by having Hydrosphere there. So that was pretty bad. But now they're actually changing that and fixing it, I guess, right? Because it was just like an oversight, so that's totally fine. And then we've got underused skills being buffed. So this is the thing that everybody was excited for, and again, it's underwhelming, right? It's very underwhelming because, again, tons of skills that people would like to play, that are cool skills that they would love to use, are just bad still, right? And they're not addressed in here, and if they are, it's like a minimal change, right? So Artillery Ballista now has 50% effectiveness of added damage. Doesn't matter. Base explosion radius slightly bigger. Arrows take less to fall. Just small nerf. It's not gonna change anything. Nobody's gonna play it. Blazing Salvo was already a balanced skill, by the way. It was already a balanced skill. Now it's gonna be just a strong skill, right? So Blazing Salvo, Dan had a build with Blazing Salvo. There is a Blazing Salvo minor build that's a very good league starter. That's gonna be now even better, I guess, right? So Blazing Salvo did not actually need a buff. It's a very good skill if you know how to play it, if you understand the mechanics of it, if you understand how it can split, if you understand the AoE overlap, if you understand that you're supposed to either stand right on top of the target or put mines right on top of the target. If you understand that, it's a very powerful skill. If you don't, it feels bad. So the skill was in a fine place and it's getting buffed, so I guess it's just gonna be strong now, right? Totally fine. I like Blazing Salvo. It's a small enough buff. It's a small enough buff that it's not gonna make it overpowered, so it's just gonna be a good skill. Cleave, very underwhelming buff. I mean, it's a needed buff, right? So that's a good change, but Cleave needs more, right? Cleave needs more. Crackling Lance, this is a very good buff. Crackling Lance was really good in terms of the damage, right? If you play the correct build for it, it was like the best lightning skill. Like if you're like a lightning spellcaster, Crackling Lance has the highest DPS of any skill that you can use, right? Like generically, if you have a build that can like use multiple different lightning spells, Crackling Lance is the best for single target. But for clear, it was really annoying because it would hit like portion of the pack, but it wouldn't hit the entire pack. So with this change, adding the +2 radius and actually +3 to beam width per intensity, it's actually pretty huge, right? So it's going to be wide enough beam that it's going to hit entire packs now, and the clear is going to be really good. So a bunch of like giga tanky Guardian build that I played, if you want to play Inquisitor, if you want to play Elementals with Crackling Lance, the clear speed is actually going to be much better, because before I would like swap to Shock Nova or Spark for clear. If I was playing like a Soulthirst build that had like insane cast speed, Crackling Lance was really good for single target, but it felt a little bit underwhelming in terms of the clear because you had to cast way too many times because you wouldn't be hitting the entire pack. With this extra width and the width per intensity, this is going to fix that, right? So Crackling Lance is actually a meta skill now, in my opinion, right? Crackling Lance is actually the best, well, like one of the best spells in the game. In terms of the pure damage, it's like the best lightning spell, and now it's gonna have good enough clear, in my opinion, right? This is enough, I think. Like if I looking at the numbers, yeah, looking at the numbers, like just imagining the width of the spell, that is enough, because it didn't need that much. You just needed to be able to get like a little bit extra AoE, but it wasn't scaling with AoE, right? Because it's like this weird beam thing that doesn't scale that much, right? But with this extra radius, this is actually gonna, the width, not radius, this is actually gonna be really good. So Crackling Lance, definitely like a strong meta skill, in my opinion, right now. And people don't understand that because, I don't know, they just don't know how the game works, I guess. They just don't know that this is like the strongest single target spell in the game almost. Decoy Totem. Just has more life. Okay, fine, that's fine. Devouring Totem has more life. That's fine. These are like fine changes. Energy Blade, more damage with 200 weapons. That's fine. That's a fine. Like all these are cool, right? All of these are like, hey, these are underused. We're gonna give it a little bit of a buff and see. Maybe somebody will get interested, make a build with it. We're not gonna go too crazy. Like I'm happy with those, right? It's totally fine. It's just that there should be a lot more here, you know. That's it. But these are cool. Then we've got the Firestorm, small buff, still not gonna be played. Haste, massive buff. This is honestly, people look at this and are like, wow, that's kind of good. Like, and they don't understand how it scales, how movement speed scales, how attack speed scales. This is really fucking good, right? This is gonna be really good because if you're playing a minion build, you're gonna be able to do more damage, right? Because not only you get more attack speed and more cast speed, but more movement speed means also higher uptime. And if you're scaling auras as well as many minion builds do, you're going to be able to get more uptime and more damage and more clear speed. This is really powerful, right? So this haste buff is very strong, and I think even people who are saying, wow, this is really good, they're kind of underestimating how good this actually is, right? This is super good. Like haste now is like a full-blown giga powerful aura that I really want to use, right? Like I really will try my best to fit haste in every build that I'm playing, right? Because of the fact that I'm getting so much movement speed, right? So how much movement speed we're getting? Like 4% to 5, yeah, so 15% movement speed at level 20, right? 15% movement speed just from this aura without any aura effect, right? So if you get like 100% aura effect, which is not that difficult to get, you're getting like 30% movement speed. If you get some levels on this, you get like 35% movement speed. really huge, right? Really huge, on top of like the huge amount of attack speed or cast speed, or both that you're getting, which helps for shield charging and casting spells and so on. So if you're playing like a Raider is actually honestly gonna be so powerful, right? Like the elemental ailments, meaning like elemental ailment immunity that you can very easily get on Raider, meaning you don't have to use the Purity of Elements, so you instant use Haste. The changes to the spell suppression, which means Raider is more powerful. Raider is gonna feel so fucking good. Scaling that with Haste, like a caster Raider with Onslaught effect, super gigafast like shield charge and casting spells. Like, what if I do like a Crackling Lance? Wait, Crackling Lance or Blazing Salvo Raider with the Haste, okay? That's gonna be such a good feeling build now, because you're gonna have so much attack speed and cast speed, right? Doesn't matter what they put on Trickster, Raider is gonna be so powerful, I think, with all of these changes, right? So there are so many really cool changes for really cool and exciting builds that are gonna feel very, very well, and they're just gonna be zooming like crazy. And people are looking at these patch notes like, wow, they're only nerfs. Like, what are you talking about? Like, there are so many insane changes. Like, we're getting so much power creep that people don't see. Reeve increased damage effectiveness. So my Reeve build that I did this league is getting a buff, and at a pretty significant buff, right? 25% increased effectiveness of added damage, and it's basically all added damage. Like, it's all the damage skill, like it's like just like 25% buff to my build. So instead of what, 40 million, we're gonna be doing 50 million now with the same setup. Okay. And then for other Reeve, like Reeve Raider or whatever, it's probably gonna be fine. I played this before. It has a little bit weak single target damage, but you can find a way to scale it. Rejuve Totem has more life, doesn't really matter. Scorching Ray deals a little bit more damage, so people might go back to Scorching Ray instead of the Fire Trap for the RF builds. Scourge Arrow, higher damage effectiveness. I don't see this doing that much. I actually saw someone play with, wasn't Crouching Tuna testing Scourge Arrow totems, so he's gonna be happy about this buff. Then we've got Shock Nova. Shock Nova no longer has 20% chance to shock enemies or increased effect of shock. Instead, it has plus 10% to maximum effect of shock, and the ring always shocks. So this would be cool if you're playing, for example, the Crackling Lance, and if you're doing single target damage, you could have, for example, this as a debuff, right? You could use it as a debuff now. That would be pretty cool as well. Soul Rend buff, again, another build that was totally fine. Just like, okay, so Crackling Lance was a fine skill. Now it's very good. Now it's like top meta skill. Blazing Salvo was fine. Now it's like a very, very good skill. What else? Soul Rend was totally fine. Now it's gonna be more powerful, right? So Soul Rend is like a very specific skill that doesn't really work for like really high investment, right? If you want to scale to like, I don't know, 20 million damage, you cannot really do that, right? But if you want to scale like 3 to 6 million damage, you can, right? So now you're gonna be able to scale it maybe to like 8 to 10 million damage, right? Which is gonna be very powerful and be able to do all content. Soul Rend is like a skill that you want to use for specific things, right? So Soul Rend Occultist is a build, you can check it out on my channel, that is like the best build in the game, except for maybe CF Glad. CF Glad is equally good. So CF Glad and Soul Rend Occultist are the best builds for farming Expedition. You can just spawn like hundreds of Expedition mobs, shoot one time, and they all explode. They all chain explode because of how Soul Rend pierces everything, because of the Occultist explode, because of it being dot, so it negates the block, because of it being also hit, so it applies the curses. It's a perfect skill for that, right? So it's a hit and a dot, and it has like the best of both worlds, and it uses you can apply the explode. It's just so fucking powerful. Now, one thing that I want to caution you though, do not use it with Spellslinger. That's a bait. Do not fucking use the Soul Rend with Spellslinger. That's not a thing, okay? That's not a thing. That's something that people were using for leveling when the Spellslinger was completely different, okay? And they were using ED and Contagion and Soul Rend at the same time because they could do all of that together with Spellslinger. That was just Spellslinger being powerful. Soul Rend is not supposed to be... Oh, also, it didn't cost mana back then, okay? It didn't cost mana to trigger these skills, and you could bypass the Soul Rend cost, which is why it was good. The game is completely different now, okay? Do not try to do Soul Rend Spellslinger, it's trash, okay? Soul Rend Spellslinger is a horrible idea that you should not even think about doing. Just play Chaos.Occultist and then transition to Soul Rend once you're in maps or in the end game, where you can get like the helmet enchant and maybe the Dying Sun Flask, and you're gonna be very, very strong. You're gonna have a very fun time mapping or doing like expedition, doing logbooks. If you're into that, it's the best build for that. You can check out my YouTube channel for the guide for that. Spellslinger, again, Spellslinger is such a complex skill, I don't even want to get into this. I feel like Spellslinger is like the most underutilized skill in the game, even though people use it a fair amount. It's like such a complex, crazy skill that definitely needs to be explored a lot more. So I don't even know like how powerful that is, because there is so much that goes into this skill. Sunder, still not gonna be good. The damaging wave traveling 60% faster is huge. Like that's amazing, okay? But you could instead just completely rework it, like revert the changes, right? Stop this fucking like restarting the wave when you cast another spell, because it makes, you're putting a cap on the possible attack speed that you can have, right? You're like, the more attack speed you have, the worse the skill feels, which is really, really bad, right? Because you're lowering the AoE by getting more attack speed. So that's a very bad just mechanic that's in this that should be completely removed, like ignoring all these changes, right? Val Flame Blast, still not gonna be played. Arrow Nova support, a little bit buffed. It was underutilized, getting a little buffed, that's good. Urgent Orders, a little bit buffed, and Krugo Strike Affliction is being buffed. So for certain skills, it's gonna be very good, especially if you're using like Nightblade, which Nightblade is not in these in this manifesto, right? Like the most powerful, or maybe the second most powerful support gem in the entire game, not being touched. I don't understand why. I don't know if GG doesn't know that Nightblade exists, and it has like 17 lines of text that give you insane amount of damage for multiple different archetypes of builds, like dots and like crit hits. Nightblade is just insane, and it not being nerfed is very, very weird. Definitely should be nerfed. And this list should have more skills, right? Obviously, this list should have more skills. Maybe I should make a list of that and send it to GGG, post it on the forums or something, because it's lacking a lot of underutilized skills that could be very easily changed. But the things that are here are all great, right? And out of the things that are here, the notable things to pay attention to is Blazing Salvo, very good skill. If you want to start with a miner, Blazing Salvo miner is a strong skill to start. Crackling Lance, very strong skill now, and the clear speed now will feel much better. So that's a really good change. Haste, very powerful aura, can be used in any build in the game, pretty much. Like pretty much any build in the game wants to use this, unless you're playing like something that really doesn't care about attack speed and cast speed. What else do we have? Then we've got Soul Rend, so a build that was already like a specialized build for farming certain type of content. Now it's easier. So now it requires either less investment and you can make giant money, like just like farming expedition, or you can scale it a little bit more into the late game and make like a full-fledged build. And that's basically it. Then we've got the Trickster changes. So Trickster Ascendancy is going to be reworked. We don't know what it's going to be yet. And then Juggernaut. These changes to Juggernaut are honestly super underwhelming. They're making a one powerful notable split, Unbreakable into two now, but more powerful skills. Actually feels the opposite. It feels like it's being split into two weaker skills instead of one powerful skill. This is not good enough, even though increased life regeneration rate is a very powerful stat that most people underestimate. There is only like one node on the skill tree where you can find that, right? But people are still not gonna be playing Juggernaut like this. Like you're just making it worse with this specific change, right? Then we've got the Chieftain node buffed a little bit for the slums. It doesn't really change much. It's still probably not going to be the node that people pick, because there are better nodes. And then Pathfinder, Master Alchemist, a completely useless node, is being changed into another useless node, and the node that everybody would take instead is being nerfed. So this might seem like a buff to people who read it, like at first glance when you read this, it's like, wow, I'm getting this and 20% increased effect. 20% increased effect is nothing, only applies to magic flasks. It's trash, nobody will pick it, and this is a nerf, right? So Pathfinder is just getting nerfed. An Ascendancy that already was like in the lower-ish tier of the Ascendancies in terms of the power is getting nerfed. This is ridiculous, right? Honestly, this should not have happened. They should just add the 20% increased flask effect to that notable, and that's it. And just leave it at that. Just add that and see if maybe someone will ever pick it, which nobody would anyway. It's trash. It's just horrible, right? Really, really bad. So yeah, really, really bad. There are so many better things that they could have done, right? You could have done like maybe per every like magic flask equipped, or per every unique flask equipped or whatever, you get like reduce like chance to avoid elemental ailments or something per flask equipped, or you get like maybe life per flask equipped or something, or maybe life per empty flask slot or something, or chance to avoid elemental ailments per empty flask slot. Like you could do so many different things, so many interesting things, but you chose to do something that is completely useless, that is basically just really, really bad. Yeah, it's just so bad. And this nerf, like, because nobody's gonna pick this anyway, so what you've done is you nerfed the node that everybody will want to pick, right? Like the one node that people want to pick on Pathfinder, you just nerfed it, and that's all that everybody will see. That's all that will affect people, right? So that's pretty bad. There are so many more like powerful ascendancies that should be actually nerfed, right? Duelist has the Champion Ascendancy, which is too strong. Champion Ascendancy should be nerfed. And then Occultist Ascendancy should be nerfed, right? Those are two ascendancies that need a nerf. They need a little bit of a slap on the wrist. Necromancer got a nerf, so that's good, because it was one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful ascendancy in the game. So Necro being nerfed is good. But then Occultist and Champion also need a nerf, so not nerfing them is a mistake. Nerfing Pathfinder is also a mistake, in my opinion. So Omniscience is being nerfed. You basically need 50% more Omniscience to get the same effect. Roughly, it's not exactly the same, but like something like that. It's about 50% more Omniscience, which I think is a fair buff. So you can still scale it. It's still going to be very powerful, but it's not like a just go-to change, like go-to item that you can very easily make more powerful than anything else you can use, right? So it's still going to be really good. And in higher budget builds, it's going to be super strong. But in the lower budget builds, it's not going to be like, oh, I equipped this and I have some stats on my gear and now I'm super strong. Like, it's not going to be anymore. That kind of a situation, right? So overall, good change. It's good that they didn't like remove it or change the drop rate or anything. They just make it harder to use, right? And that's I think pretty good. Like lower the power gradually, right? This is the best change that they could have done for that, in my opinion. So I agree with that completely. Melding of the Flesh now has a penalty to max res, so it's harder to get all max res to 90. This is very good change. Honestly, very needed. You will need to roll it well, and then you're gonna have to have like 4% extra max elemental resistances, which is gonna be doable, but you're gonna need to invest more, right? If you want to have like this unkillable character with 90 all max res. So that's a pretty good change. Again, these two changes are very clever. They're, I think, the exact way that they should have done this, and that's really good. I'm happy to see that. And we've got Brittle being nerfed by basically half. Brittle is being nerfed in half. It's still very strong, right? It was giga strong. Now it's gonna be just very strong. Just like, hey, you have a double crit chance if you have Brittle. Yeah, still pretty fucking good. So definitely deserved and very good. The Reservation Mastery, this is hard to judge for me, okay? This is pretty hard to judge for me. The 15% increased mana reservation efficiency is something that every build, no matter what build I played, every single build I played would take this mastery, right? Every single build I played would path to this mastery around Act 4, Act 5, right? Where I want to equip another big aura, right? This was just unquestionably the most powerful mastery on the tree that every single build in the game would take always, no matter what, right? So clearly it was too powerful, right? And needed to be nerfed. Now, these other masteries, did they have to be nerfed? I don't think so, right? I don't know if these other masteries had to be nerfed. They were still taken, but only by the builds who's actually stacked a lot of auras, and only by the builds who were like using the shield, you know, reserving your auras on life and stuff like that. So this one, I don't know if it needs to be touched, but I guess it's still a reasonable value to pick. This one is still a reasonable value to pick, 10%. But this one is just removed, right? Maybe they should have nerfed it. Maybe they should have given it a lower value, like maybe like 7% or something like that. people would still probably path to it on every single build. So I guess it's a deserved nerf, right? Because you don't want like all the builds to look the same and path to exact same places on the skill tree. So I guess now you have to path to, you still have to path to the same places. It's a very difficult change to evaluate. Honestly, this was way too powerful, you know, considering like every single build wanted to take it. But I don't know if the change they went about it was correct. But since I cannot think of the better change, then I guess it's fine, you know, I'll accept it. Then we've got the Flasks modifiers being nerfed. So we've got the Juggernaut Flask, which gave you like 7 charges, being nerfed. Now you get like 3 charges max. Totally fine change. I like this. No, there was another line somewhere else where it said existing items can be made worse using a Divine Orb. I find that a nice way to put it. So this is being nerfed. That's pretty fair change. It was too powerful. The focus craft that made it basically so that you have skills that don't cost mana or life. It's basically removed. That's totally fine. It was kind of like very abusive. So that's fine. The Timeless Jewel exclusive Chainbreaker is being reworked. So again, this is something that is not gonna be used because we don't have enough mana regeneration on our characters, because that has been nerfed. Once they change the mana regeneration so that you can get more mana regen, it's probably gonna be strong, right? You're gonna be able to get a lot of rage, and especially on certain builds that don't cast too frequently, right? It's gonna be pretty good for the movement speed on them and so on. And like maybe keeping up your berserk, but this is something that requires so much mana regeneration that right now you have to have like a very specific niche build for it that probably requires like some 5-head to come up with that, and it's not usable for most characters. Then we've got like extra damage recoup on jewels, and that's it, right? So those are all the changes. Overall, I think the changes are the changes that they made, like suppression changes, are pretty good. Let me hide all of this so I can see it easier. Like suppression changes are pretty good. The keystones that are being buffed are still gonna be bad. A lot of stuff that is being nerfed are still gonna be used, right? Because it's still powerful. Minion balance is insane, just a complete shake-up of the changes. And I think I'm gonna come up now with a list of league starters based on this, keeping in mind that this is not all of the changes that we've seen, right? Like there's gonna be more changes in the patch notes. They're gonna take feedback from the players and see what else needs to be adjusted. So probably, hopefully, Seismic Trap is gonna get an actual nerf, right? And then maybe they'll keep the crit on the tree for minions, but honestly, minions are gonna be very strong. Forget it, like minions are gonna be so fucking strong. Like people don't know what's coming. Like people think minions are being destroyed. Bro, minions are being buffed like crazy. People just don't understand it. Like people are always stuck in this mindset of like, I'm gonna have to play the exact same build that I played before and don't look at other opportunities, right? Which have been elevated to higher level than honestly anything we have right now, right? So SRS is going to be a great starter. Absolution is going to be a great starter. There are going to be so many good like Phantasms that are going to be great on a league start. They're going to be so powerful and you're going to be able to do so much damage. It's honestly really, really crazy like how much good stuff the minions are getting. And the people who are not realizing that and are not going to play minions are going to regret it. Like I'm not going to be league starting minions because I have like a very specific plan for my league start. But my probably second and third and fourth build are probably all going to be minions because I feel like it's going to be so insanely powerful and people are just not reading these patch notes correctly. But hopefully this helped you understand the patch notes better, and there's no reason to despair. Do not listen to Reddit. They don't know what they're talking about. And see you next time when I make a video about the possible league starters for the next league. Thank you so much for watching and see you next time. Bye bye.